So the water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi has us all outraged, as we should be. But there's something else about Mississippi that I recently learned that is astonishing to me. Apparently, for more than 2 years now, there has been a huge scandal about the misappropriation of welfare funds in the state of Mississippi. Now, if you, like me, haven't really heard of the scandal, that's not a surprise. You know why? Because for the last 2 years, the judges down there have been issuing gag orders preventing people from telling the media, and by extension the public, about what's going on. Take a look. So let's look into it and see what it is they're so intent on hiding from us. Well, it turns out that the officials down there in Mississippi have been using welfare funds to pay Brett Favre for speeches he never made. $1.1 million, in fact. Take a look. And not only that, but another $5 million of the state's welfare monies were also paid to the University of Southern Mississippi at Brett Favre's request, because he attended that university and his daughter also attended there and played volleyball there. And what was the $5 million for? A new volleyball court. Take a look. And according to text messages, Brett Favre also sought a $3.2 million grant for a pharmaceutical company in which he was a shareholder. The company apparently was making some new drug to treat concussions. Now, it would appear that the pharmaceutical company ultimately received $2.15 million of the state's welfare funds, and there's evidence that Brett Favre and the director of the company offered the governor of Mississippi and some other officials shares in the company in exchange for that money, and they also offered to buy somebody in the government a brand new truck if they would approve the funds. Take a look. And there were a lot more welfare funds misappropriated down there in Mississippi. But we were talking about Brett Favre. Let's finish up talking about his additional involvement in the scam. There's also evidence that Brett Favre was asking for another $1 million for the University of Southern Mississippi to repay a debt he owed toward that volleyball court. Now, surprisingly enough, there are no criminal charges against Brett Favre, and none coming as far as we're aware, although the FBI has questioned him. Altogether, they have embezzled, stole, whatever you want to call it, approximately $94 million in welfare funds intended for poor people in one of the poorest states in our country. They were using the money for luxury cars, basketball tournaments, payouts to relatives of state officials. Apparently, it's been known for a long time that that money was being misused. And while all this was going on, Mississippi was down there denying welfare benefits to upwards of 90% of people who applied for them, telling them things like, "We don't have the money." And then to top it all off, they fired the attorney that is responsible for investigating the charges, and they can't even get their story straight about why they fired him. So there's a lot going on in these United States of America, and What I find is that at every turn, the rich, the famous, those in power are getting away with doing whatever they want. They're not paying taxes. They're taking federal funds and misappropriating them. They're taking state funds and diverting them to their own uses, but let an everyday person get a loan or be behind on their taxes or do anything in this country, and the full force of the law is coming against them. We need to wake up and stop following these bogus laws and rules that are only designed to hold us down while everyone else in power is doing whatever they want, playing fast and loose with the rules and not paying any attention and not paying any consequences. That's what I think. What do you think? And this comment raises an excellent point that I'd like to address. Before I do, I wanted to explain that the way the Mississippi state officials diverted that money to improper purposes was by creating two nonprofits, and then the Mississippi Department of Human Services, DHS, administered a federal grant program and used money from that program and diverted it to those two nonprofit organizations, which in turn awarded or provided the money for improper purposes to improper parties that were not the intended welfare recipients. Now on to the gag order. As you can see here, the ex-welfare chief, meaning the former director of the Mississippi Department of Human Services, whose name is John Davis, has attorneys who asked the judge to reinforce and continue gag orders that previously had been issued. As you can see here, Davis's lawyers told the judge that the current head of DHS and the current state auditor have been making statements to the media that threaten Davis's ability to have a fair trial. I also read in another article that the judge herself was concerned that with all of the media coverage and all of the statements in the media, it would be very difficult to find unbiased citizens to serve as jurors in the case. So the judge did agree to the request and maintain the order in place. In the meantime, it's no surprise that the public is not going to be informed about exactly how much was stolen, what purposes it was used for, and so forth because of the gag order. This comment actually raises a really good question too. After all, this is a scam involving federal welfare dollars. So we would expect the federal government to get involved if those funds have been misused and misappropriated. But as you can see here, the feds weren't initially called in on the case. The state auditor in Mississippi and the local district attorney worked on the case and investigated the case for 8 months without involving federal authorities. And of course, as we can see here, tens of millions of federal dollars were involved. So that's surprising. And in fact, as you can see at the bottom, the U.S. Attorney for Mississippi at the time complained that he wasn't consulted and said that he was surprised when the charges were filed because he didn't learn of it until the media reported on it. Mississippi state officials are now claiming that federal authorities are involved and are determined to get to the bottom of it. But according to other articles and reports I read, there have been no pronouncements of any kind about this case by federal authorities. So people are questioning, are the feds really involved in this case? Or are they leaving it to the state officials? But that's not the only weird thing about this case. Another thing that's really weird about this case is that the Mississippi State Attorney General has not been involved in the case, even though they're saying that this is the largest public fraud case in Mississippi history. They're saying that the Attorney General, as you can see at the top, her involvement was limited to signing off on the civil case that's trying to recoup funds. And when they asked her whether her office had any interest in the case. She said, oh, of course they're very engaged, but as you can see in that second paragraph, she said it's pending litigation and she can't comment on it. Another thing that's really concerning is that the Mississippi Department of Human Services hired an auditing firm to get to the bottom of what was going on, but then they limited the information that the auditing firm could examine. They weren't given access, it says here, to a former welfare director's computer hard drive or financials. It was limited in whose emails it could examine, and the auditing firm stated in its report that they probably would have found more misspending if they hadn't been so limited. Looks like corruption and cover-up all the way around.